So you want to go to Medellin, Colombia, but you're not sure where to stay. In this video, we're going to talk about the best neighborhoods in Medellin, Colombia, and exactly where you should stay in Medellin to maximize your travel experience. Maybe you're a traveler or a passport bro looking to stay for 1 to 2 weeks. Maybe you're a digital nomad looking to stay for 1 to 2 months. Or maybe you're an expat family looking to relocate. And in this video, we're going to break down exactly where you should stay for each type of person to maximize your experience. So to kick off the video, let's locate ourselves, because I've noticed in my travels, a lot of people aren't that good at geography. So Medellin, Colombia is a city of 4 million people. And here is the international airport where you're probably going to arrive at, Jose Maria Cordova. Now, before we get into Medellin proper, I want to point out this little neighborhood, or a little city actually here, called Rio Negro. And it's pretty cool. And if you're looking for somewhere out of the city, in the countryside, where you can rent a big house and still have fast Wi-Fi and infrastructure, Rio Negro is actually pretty cool. So without further ado, let's jump into this where to stay city guide, where to stay in Medellin, Colombia. And I thought maybe the best place to start would be to tell you where not to stay. And this will basically apply to anyone. I don't care if you're visiting for 2 weeks or 2 months, you're not going to want to stay in any of the areas that we're about to mention. So number 1 on the not stay list is Bello. Bello is technically in its own independent city, home to 100,000 plus people. And if you're in Medellin, you're going to meet people from Bello. You say, hey, where are you from? They say Bello, blah, blah, blah. So you'll meet people from here, but you do not want to stay here. Yes, you're going to find places from Bello on Airbnb. It's going to be significantly cheaper, but it's not worth the money. It's not worth saving a couple $100. I'm telling you right now. The reason being, it's a little bit scary, sketchy, dangerous, and just overall not up to Western standards. So I highly recommend you do not stay in Bello. If you are looking for a more authentic Medellin experience, I will get to that in this video, where you can stay to be away from the gringos and so forth. But Bello is not it. Please avoid Bello at all costs. I do know digital nomads that have stayed here, and obviously they've survived, but still, you're just not going to have the best experience. Now, moving on to other areas where you should not stay, let's go to downtown. So in my mind, this is really like the downtown, is this circle area centered on Plaza Botero. Botero is a famous artist, and right here we have the Museo de Antioquia, which is like the museum of the state, or of the Department of Antioquia. And it's a good museum. I highly recommend you go to the museum. They have lots of artwork from Botero, and you'll learn a lot about the history of Medellin and of Antioquia. So highly recommend you visit this place, but do not stay downtown. Anyone that's been to this museum knows exactly what I'm talking about. You're going to see lots of sketchy characters rolling around, and there's just a huge amount of people, and it's noisy and dangerous and all the bad things. So basically, there are certain cities in Latin America where the downtown is an attractive place to be, and there are other cities in Latin America where you do not want to stay downtown under any circumstance. Sao Paulo comes to mind, San Jose, Costa Rica comes to mind, and Medellin comes to mind as well. So do not stay in downtown Medellin under any circumstance. And then in between downtown and Bello, you have this area that it's hard to characterize, because really there are a lot of different neighborhoods, but I'm just going to call it the Northeast. And I would say that you do not want to stay absolutely anywhere in the Northeast. So Manrique is like kind of okay, but still you don't want to stay here. Las Nieves, Campo Valdez, Carpinelo, Andalucia Metro Station. You do not want to stay absolutely anywhere here. I'm telling you. That being said, you'll probably visit here, because this is where the cable car is that goes up to Parque RV. Parque RV is pretty cool. This is Parque RV, and you can get there by a cable car, and I recommend you go to Parque RV. It is a really cool nature experience. You take the cable car, and you're actually going to fly over the favela in order to do so. And by favela, what I mean is basically the hilly ghettos that go under the cable car and in this general northeastern area. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is what we're talking about. I mean, it definitely has a vibe in some way, but overall, I highly recommend that you do not stay in the northeast of Medellin. So basically anywhere between Bello, the northeast, all the way to downtown. This entire area is basically a no-go zone. I mean, it's not the worst in the middle of the day, but overall, it's gonna be a lot more dangerous than other areas of the city that we're gonna recommend in a minute. And I don't care if you're staying for a week or a year or 6 months, you do not want to stay anywhere in these 3 areas that I've mentioned. And so those are the 3 main no-go zones that kind of represent a contiguous area. And if I had to add a 4th no-go zone, it would be basically near this airport. So there's a second airport called Olaya Herrera. My double R is not great, but I wouldn't stay anywhere too close to this airport, and that's simply based on the noise. So it is a very active regional airport that flies to other places within Colombia, and there's many flights a day. And we'll do a little zoom in here to check out the areas. They're very modest, humble areas, obviously being because, you know, no rich people want to live too close to the airport due to the noise and so forth. Hello. So basically, do not stay anywhere too close to the airport, basically in this general circumference. And so yeah, those would be the 4 areas where you do not want to stay in Medellin, Colombia. All right, so now that we know where not to stay in Medellin, let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to where you do want to stay in Medellin. And before I jump into the specific areas, I want you to know that Colombia has a really big mall culture. So whatever area you stay in, you might want to stay as close to the mall as possible. Because at the mall, not only are you going to find clothes, obviously, but the mall is kind of a different concept in Latin America. It's a whole different thing, really, where it's going to have maybe movie theaters, it's going to have restaurants, it's going to have the gym, it's going to have the barber shop. So try to stay near a mall if you can. So that'll apply to any area, but without further ado, I'll get into kind of the 4 main areas that I would want to stay in. So the first one is Laureles. The second one is El Poblado, which you've probably heard of. The third is Envigado, and the 4th is Sabaneta. So those are kind of the 4 popular digital nomad expat areas in Medellin. And even within these areas, there's, you know, micro neighborhoods and so forth. But in this video, what I'm going to do is kind of go north to south. So I'll start with Laureles, and I'll walk through some of the characteristics of each of these different areas. So Laureles is, in my mind, centered really around these 2 parks. So there's the Primer Parque de Laureles, the first park of Laureles, and then there's the Segundo Parque de Laureles. And if you were to stay here and you told someone, oh, I live near Segundo Parque de Laureles, anybody in Medellin is going to know what that means. Okay? And so Laureles is cool because it's a little bit more local than, say, Poblado, which we'll get to in a minute, a little bit cheaper than Poblado. It's flat, so you're not on the hills at all, so it's quite walkable. You could even have a bicycle or an e-scooter or something like that. And there's definitely tons of bars here. There's tons of nightlife here. There's lots of digital nomad cafes. So if I typed in, let's say, cafe Wi-Fi, you're gonna have lots of cafes that come up. Cafe Revolucion I've been to, that's a pretty good one. There's a whole bunch. So there's a whole ton of cafes. There's co-working spaces. There's all the infrastructure that you need in this area. You really could live here and never have to leave this area. There's up here, there's a skate park somewhere, and where the skate park is where the gym is. Yeah, so there's skate park Estadio, and there's an outdoor gym here, and there's a mall down here at the south, the Unicentro, and look how many reviews. Like 36,000 reviews is absolutely massive, so that kind of would place it at one of the most frequented malls in the city. And there's really like a couple major bar streets here. I'm not going to go in insane detail because you could really dedicate a whole video just to talking about Laureles. But basically there's like bar streets, There's some nightlife streets that are like absolutely massive. I think it's even this one. And so when you stay in Laureles, you're also going to want to keep in mind where the bars are, where the nightlife is. And obviously, if you value sleeping, you might want to stay a little bit tucked away from those major bar streets while still maintaining proximity to them. But just doing a little bit of street view here, you can tell like it's a pretty nice organized neighborhood. It's flat, like I said, which Poblado is not. And overall, just a very nice neighborhood to stay in. It's kind of a balance of locals as well as quite a number of foreigners and expats. So you really have that balance that you're looking for. I'd say one of the downsides of Laureles, there's maybe a couple downsides, but one of the downsides is up here in sort of the northwest, you might have heard of Comuna 13, which is like the touristic favela, but there is a lot of favela type of poor, undesirable neighborhoods over here. And what happens is because it's so close to Laureles, guys will kind of descend from the mountains on motorbikes and they'll rob people in Laureles and take the cell phones and stuff like that. So that's kind of one of the downsides of Laureles. You're also pretty close to the airport as well, especially if you're in the south, especially if you're in, say, Rosales, or a little bit or in this general area. But overall, like the downsides aren't that strong here, and there's tons of good positives. So this is, one of the coolest neighborhoods in Medellin, and honestly, one of the coolest neighborhoods in all of South America, if I may be so bold. So Laureles is top-notch, highly rated. This is a great area to be. It's getting more gentrified every year, but this is kind of the general area. And I would try to stay basically as close to the parks as you can. Okay, now let's move on to El Poblado. So El Poblado, this is like debatable. In my mind, El Poblado is bigger than this small area. You also have what's called Provenza, and some people use Provenza and Poblado sort of interchangeably. Provenza is kind of this area on the east side of Poblado. There's this area called Manila, that's still considered part of Poblado. It's sort of like a sub neighborhood, a little bit quieter. Lots of good hotels here, so this is one place you might want to stay. You have Parque El Poblado here, which I guess you could sort of say is the epicenter, and then you have the Parque de la Presidenta and Parque Lineal here, and this is a nice little park with a little river going through it. I wouldn't walk here at night. Could get a little bit dangerous in terms of chance of being robbed, but in the day, nice place to walk the dog. This parque and sort of walkway and greenery here. And so Poblado, so let's talk about pros and cons of Poblado. I would say the pros are it's going to be the most international area of the city, meaning you're going to have high-end restaurants, you're going to have a higher level of English, you're going to have definitely all the infrastructure that you need in terms of high-end gyms and things to do, nightlife, concerts. Really a lot of the big club venues are here and different bars and things like that. The downside of Poblado is it's really one of the centers of the degeneracy that Medellin has become known for. I know they're trying to clean up the city a little bit in 2024, but I think a lot of that stuff is still persisting. You're going to see a little bit of, I don't want to say like particular words to get the video demoted, but let's just say there is some degeneracy in El Poblado that has historically been centered on parquilleras. I know, again, they're trying to clean up this park and make it a little bit better, a little bit more, not quite family friendly, but at least not so degenerate. But I guess that's probably still a work in progress. You can see there's tons of construction here and they're trying to make it nicer. But as you can see, it's basically just a park that's surrounded 360 by nightclubs and bars, and it's just absolutely blasting music. At night there'd be crazy lights and stuff like that. There would be dudes in the street saying like, come into my bar, free shot, you get a free shot, girls get in free, things like that. Oh my god, yo. And these girls, who knows what they're doing. But so that's kind of the epicenter of Poblado, and that's sort of the downside. I mean, there's the pros and cons of being in the most international area. And Poblado obviously kind of has some mini neighborhoods within it. If you look at the larger area of Poblado, it's actually quite gigantic. So technically all of this is Poblado going down to the castle and even a bit below that. And there's this area, I guess over to the east called El Tesoro that's pretty wealthy, pretty well off. It's got pretty high-end buildings and towers and good accommodations, and it's very hilly as well. So Poblado is quite hilly. This area is called Altos de Poblado, like Upper Poblado. This area is called Las Lomas, which is like the hills. And if you were to check this out, I think I even used to stay on this street. It does get hilly, which is good and bad. It's pretty cool because it does definitely have a lot more vegetation when you're on the hills compared to when you're in a flat area. And if you stay in a tower and you have a good view, you'll even see tropical birds flying by and stuff like that. So I do definitely appreciate the nature, but just know, it's a little bit more hilly. And so even though things look quite close, it might not be walkable, right? Like you might think that if you're staying somewhere in here, like Calle 17 or Calle 29 or 12A or something, you might think that you could just walk down here, but it's really quite hilly, especially on the way back, after the bar or something when you're walking uphill. And so you might want to take that into consideration, that unless you're really within a couple of short blocks, it's going to be almost too far to walk, even though it looks close. So I think overall it is a good place to stay. There are really nice buildings in here, and you can be sort of tucked away from the noise while still being close to the action. But if you're out here, like if you're on the east side of El Tesoro, you're going to need to take an Uber even just to get into the heart of El Poblado, even though it looks quite close and maybe it's only a kilometer away or something. It's very hilly. All right, so moving on from Medellin, I want to tell you about a neighborhood called Envigado. So Envigado, it's definitely further down, but it's really not that far from Poblado. So let's just say Envigado to Poblado. We type this in, and according to this, it's only a 19-minute drive, so really not too bad in terms of Uber. This is, there's different ways to do this drive. It could even be as quickly as 15 minutes, depending on from what part to what part, but it's really not that far. But what Envigado is really its own city, and it actually has its own license plate. So the area up here that's, officially Medellin has a Medellin license plate, and it says the word Medellin on the license plate. And then Envigado is technically its own city, and it says Envigado on the license plate, right? It's its own municipio. And the pros and cons basically of Envigado is it's going to be a lower cost of living. So I'll go through pros. So it's going to be a much lower cost of living than Laureles. It's quite flat here in the town as well, but there's also a hilly area. I'd say it's going to be safer than both Poblado and Laureles. So this is the safest area that we're talking about so far in the video. So it's going to be less expensive. It's going to be safer, pretty flat in the center, has infrastructure, like it has this mall called City Plaza that's pretty well known, and I think there's another one somewhere too, but it's good. It's going to be a more authentic experience as well, and there's tons of cafes here. It has its own little bar area. The Wi-Fi is going to be good, pretty good infrastructure. It's also quite green, and it also has proximity to a couple different parks and waterfalls that you can explore, right? You can see this Chorro de las Campanas waterfall out here. That's obviously much closer to Envigado than if you were in Poblado. So you actually get closer access to a lot of nature, the ecological parks, and so forth. So direct access to nature. And so overall, pretty solid place to be. The downside is going to be it's quite far. It's not too far from Poblado, as I demonstrated, but it ends up being quite far from Laureles, especially if there's traffic. I mean, I'm filming this on a Sunday, but if it was, I don't know, a Monday afternoon, it could take over an hour to get to Laureles, so that's something to consider. That's quite far away. And you're not going to have all the same level of international activities, like the concerts don't take place in Envigado, for example. So if I was only staying for 1 to 2 weeks in Medellin, I probably would not stay in Envigado because you're just going to be a little bit further from the action. But if you're a digital nomad or expat looking to stay for 1 to 3 months, or even a longer period of time, multiple years, maybe you have a family, then Envigado is definitely something that should be on your radar. All right, so now moving on to the fourth area is called Sabaneta. Sabaneta is also a different municipio, it's a different city, and it actually says Sabaneta on the license plate as well because it is a different city. And it's quite nice. It's still quite, I guess you would say, organized, and I wouldn't go so far as to say upscale, but it has its own culture. It's quite nice. It's got bar areas, like as you can see, we dropped into this cool plaza area that has the church. It's got some restaurants, and if you were to live in Sabaneta, you'd probably spend a lot of time hanging out in this area. It's going to have its own malls, including the Avies Maria mall here that I believe has a Smart Fit in it that I've been to, if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check that, I think. Yeah, so there's a Smart Fit here somewhere in Sabaneta. And overall, Sabaneta is a pretty good place to stay. Low cost of living. Again, probably a similar cost of living to Envigado, maybe even a little bit cheaper. And significantly cheaper than if you were staying up in El Poblado or Laureles. It's quite safe as well, Sabaneta. So safe, cheap, it's got everything you need. The downside is it's a little bit further away. So it's quite far from Poblado, and then it's very far from Laureles. And if you live in Sabaneta, a lot of people might not want to visit you because it's just a little bit too far. Honestly, I don't mind it too much. You're just in an Uber, you're on your phone, whatever. And the Uber's not expensive at all in Medellin. But it is kind of like the furthest out, kind of nice area. But yeah, you'll still see expats here, every once in a while. But certainly it's going to be more local. It's going to be the most local of the four. I think that's fair to say. So I think it's quite solid, but I think it's basically going to cost the same amount of money to live in Envigado. So I think my recommendation here is you might as well just live in Envigado, but Sabaneta is not bad either. I mean, they do have good cafes with Wi-Fi and everything else that you're going to need to have a good experience. And so those are kind of the big four areas again. So we have Laureles up in the north, we have Poblado over here, we have Envigado a little bit further south, and then we have Sabaneta all the way down south. Now, before I kind of get to the conclusion, I would mention that you might be asking, well, why haven't I mentioned certain other areas? I haven't mentioned Itaúí, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't mentioned this other stuff that's more on the outskirts. I haven't mentioned the northwest out here. And the reason is just a lot of there's different reasons. I mean, out here, it's just not going to be super desirable. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be cheap and might even have nice views and stuff, but all this stuff is really quite undesirable. You're really far from everything. You're up in the hills and just not desirable. And then kind of the same reason down south, all this stuff is much more local, less desirable. It's just not really where you want to be. So I'm telling you, just take my word for it, the main four areas that you're going to want to be are Laureles, Poblado, Envigado, and Sabaneta. I've sort of outlined in this video the pros and cons of each area, and you can sort of take those characteristics and apply it to your own situation based on where you want to live, based on your budget as well. So to summarize here, where do I ultimately think that you should stay? Well, if you're a traveler, if you're a passport bro, or you're, a traveler from Europe, and you're staying for 1 to 2 weeks, you're definitely going to want to be in either Laureles or Poblado. Those are the two main nightlife areas of the city. There are certainly little pockets of nightlife everywhere. Colombians love to party. So basically any neighborhood you're in, ultimately you can probably find a party. But the two main vortex zones of partying are going to be Poblado and Laureles. Laureles is definitely going to be a little bit more local, but honestly still quite international. It's going to be a good balance. And then Poblado is going to be the most international. It's got some pretty well-known clubs where you might see different reggaeton singers performing and so forth. So short visits, definitely one of these two. And then for longer visits, it's a good question. I think each area has pros and cons. I think Envigado, if you're on a budget of the 4 areas, Envigado is probably your best bet because it's going to be the cheapest of the 3, along with Sabaneta, but Envigado is going to be cheaper and it's still basically near everything. So I'd say if you're on a budget, meaning less than $1,500 a month or less than $2,000 a month, I definitely think Envigado is where you want to be. And if you have a little bit more of a budget, you can sort of choose between Laureles and Poblado. The thing about Poblado is you will be exposed to a little bit more degeneracy, but it's also quite a nice neighborhood too. Like, there's really nice buildings, there's pretty good nature. There's definitely more nature than Laureles. And if you're tucked away, like in, say, the El Tesoro area, you can sort of avoid the degeneracy and have pretty good nature and have really, really good views of the city, and it's overall pretty cool. But if you're in Laureles, they don't really have the same tall buildings with like sick views of the city, and it's a bit more of a concrete jungle. So for that reason, personally, I wouldn't want to stay in Laureles for a longer term stay, because I want to see a little bit more green, a little bit more vegetation. I don't like being in a loud concrete jungle. And yeah, I mean, so for that reason, I'd personally rather be somewhere near Poblado than up here in the concrete jungle of Laureles. So if it were up to me, I'd probably be somewhere in this Envigado to Poblado continuum. If I really wanted to have access to nightlife and expat events and digital nomad meetups and dating and stuff like that, I'd probably want to be in the larger Poblado area, if I can pull that up somehow, and probably near one of the malls. So there's a whole bunch of malls here. There's San Lucas in the south. There's one called what's called Milla de Oro. Where's Milla de Oro? There's Milla de Oro here. There's a whole bunch of malls. It's actually kind of nuts. There's Oviedo, there's Panamericana, there's Santa Fe. Santa Fe is another one of the most famous ones in the city. And there's some ones kind of on this side too. There's Amsterdam, etc. So I'd probably try to pick like a sick building, try to get maybe a penthouse or something with a sick balcony, with a really sick view of the city, with vegetation, without another building blocking my view, where I can see the city. And then here I'll be somewhere kind of in here, and I'll be a quick Uber ride to the malls. I'll be a quick Uber ride to Poblado. I can get up to Laureles if I need to. I can get down to Envigado if I need to, although admittedly you probably won't go to Envigado much if you don't live there. And yeah, this is really like the hub of the city, is just kind of like all in this area. So basically, I'd say sort of south of this highway, and then obviously east of this highway, and north of Envigado. Essentially the borders of El Poblado, as I've shown a couple times. So I'd probably stay somewhere in El Poblado, but I'd definitely try to be far away, at least a reasonable distance from the vortex zone. So I know some people do stay in, say, Manila, and they have a good time, or they stay quite close to the vortex zone. Personally, I'd rather be up in the hills a little bit and have a sick place and have proximity, but still be a little bit far away from it as well, so I can sort of tune out the craziness. So I think with that, we'll wrap up this video, our guide on where to stay in Medellin, Colombia. I'll note that if you want personal assistance from My Latin Life, you can book a consultation call with us. There's going to be a link in the description to this video to book a call with us, speak to me personally, and we can help you build your internationalization plan, your travel plan, your relocation plan. Whether you're looking to go to Colombia for a short period of time and you just want to maximize your experience, or you're looking to relocate for a longer period of time. By the way, we're an immigration consultant firm, and we help people get visas in Colombia and also anywhere in Latin America. So if you want to get a visa, you want to get residency, you want to maybe even work towards Colombian citizenship, we can help with that as well. And the odds are you're probably a digital nomad, you probably are somewhat location independent, and so you can check out some of our other city guides and videos in the recommended video here. Thanks for watching.